They usually limit their meals to only 2 a day, and even those are very simple, consisting primarily of vegetables and fruits, with some synthetic foods. The Martians are not meat eaters, partly for the reason that animal life has largely passed from existence on Mars, with the exception of mutants and the few obscure species previously mentioned, and these are inedible. The Martian has learned how to grow, and also to synthesize many species and to produce artificially many protein foods. Many nuts, some of which look somewhat like peanuts, are raised. A large nut similar to a pecan is grown on vines. There is a vegetable something like a cross between cabbage and lettuce, the leaves being 3/4 of an inch thick and about a foot wide. It is light green in color and very nourishing. Another common vegetable looks like our onion, but has large, flat, flared leaves. The people produce artificial sunlight in huge tubes so they can grow foods in their underground cities. Space is not too plentiful. There are some dwarf trees, 3 to 4 feet high, with a fruit that looks like an orange but has meat like that of an apple, is red-skinned and sweet. It is called situ. Some other vegetables are grown in troughs in long rows. These look like huge mushrooms and have a delicious meat. Martians are closely connected with the Venusians through thought transference or mental telepathy. At one time, interplanetary travel was used, but these spacecraft are at present stored in huge underground hangars, and are being held in readiness for any emergency, such as a sudden mass evacuation of the population should any unexpected need arise. Uzak explained that the science of interplanetary travel was something very difficult for Earthman to understand, inasmuch as the people and the craft itself would, in taking off, actually change the rate of vibration of their own and the craft's atomic structure. Thus they would in a sense become weightless and temporarily free of various usual forces such as gravitation, inertia, etc. This is something like preconditioning for firewalking, which is still practiced in different parts of the globe. My guide went on to explain that this science of changing the atomic vibration rates is a very advanced one, and that, if the Earthmen would learn this, it would remove all the present-day obstructions and barriers such as materials, fuel, pressures, and the hundreds of other hindrances to present-day space travel. At present their experiments have progressed to a point where a man's body can be changed into electrical energies, sent over a radar beam and then changed back to the original state, all in a matter of a split second, and with no pain or discomfort to the individual. This no doubt sounds fantastic, but remember that this same thing is being done here frequently, from the spirit side of life. The memoirs of Sir William Crookes give an example of this in his experience with Katie, who materialized after being dead for several years. She was so real that he embraced and kissed her. Afterward he said she was as real as his living wife. Nowadays it is only the ignorant man who scoffs at any new ideas, and no doubt there will be those who will be unable to believe these truths. But it does not matter, since that still does not alter the facts. Just 50 years ago they were laughing at the Wright brothers and think of what has been invented and improved and brought into use since that time. No less so in the future. The things of science which are commonplace in the Martian way of life could well become a part of ours in some future day. I was informed that the Martians understand what is happening to the Earth people and its veritable rat race, and they are very desirous of aiding through mental telepathy to inspire as many of the Earthians as are receptive to their ways for the advancement of mankind and the improvement of conditions on this planet and within man himself. Until man realizes the great overbalance on the material side and gains the necessary spiritual knowledge, we cannot hope to be harmonious with the other more advanced planets. They say that it is realized only too well that they must not interfere with the evolution or progress of man on Earth to any great extent, for it would not be in keeping with God's immutable law of individual soul progress. The scientists of Mars have informed me that our telescopes, in the photographing process, are subject to error and do not get refraction but infraction. Sometimes the light rays, or vibrations, as they are more properly called, are at times subjected to distortions, or bendings, in their flight through space, due to the proximity of some other planetary body. Because of the conjunction of magnetic lines of force, the astronomer does not always get a true picture of what he thinks he is seeing. Also, the planet Mars, on the outside of its surface, has a tremendously charged shell. While it is invisible to the eye, this can cause great distortions in light ray frequencies. And so the time has come, at least for the present, to return to our more familiar planet Earth, and I do so reluctantly, for there are still many more facets of life on, rather in, Mars, of which I have only a slight understanding. I would like to learn more of their various customs, celebrations and observances. Obviously it cannot all be taken in during only a few trips. I cannot recall a single instance of this most fascinating and interesting experience of my visits to Mars without a deep feeling of awe, reverence and gratitude to this very fine person who calls himself Muriel for giving so unselfishly of his time and efforts in explaining so many things about the planet, its people, manners, etc. But the most important part he is playing, along with many others on their planet for all have this one thing in common is to present the plea for man to heed their warnings and put the use of atomic energy to constructive use, instead of in bombs. For through their ability of clairvoyance and mental telepathy they can't see what is happening, and are tremendously concerned regarding their own planets. For anyone who understands even the slightest degree regarding the fourth dimension, can't help but realize that the destruction caused by the explosions and other results on the physical plane are indeed a very small part of the upheaval which takes place in the higher realms of existence, and even on the other planets. When throwing a pebble into a pool, we can only see the ripples with the physical eyes. But still down, on and on, goes the stone regardless of whether we see it or not. The men on other planets are pleading for their own sake as well as ours for us to cease this nonsensical destructive thing that can only lead to tremendous repercussions in the ethers, even to a far greater degree than in the material or physical way. There is also a grave concern by these people about our destructive downhill way of life. We are creating and breeding a race of psychopathic misfits in our highly specialized, mechanical world. The people are becoming robots. They cannot sleep for nightmares from fear and insecurity. Their days are an endless succession of almost frantic scurrying, or worse, a robot-like existence of work, sleep, and work. On every hand, flagrant psychological and sexual stimulants are used for advertisements. Suggestion is used to hammer home these cheap and malicious messages until the brain becomes numb and neurotic. Exploitation of the masses has become a highly specialized science, ruthless and cold-blooded, running the gamut from charity to vice. On the other hand, there are almost equally frantic attempts being made by various religious groups, churches, individuals, etc., to portray in some way to the great masses the grave dangers confronting them. These efforts are pitifully small and weak. Moreover, these efforts are not above suspicion, for there are, here as elsewhere, many charlatans. Resolving all these facts, and in trying to establish and correlate an active, vital, spiritual concept in their hearts and minds, earthlings must find their own solution. Quite likely, in some future day, man will evolve a way of life that will embody not only some of the old spiritual and psychological factors which have been tried and tested, but many new and advanced facts will be added, new at least as far as the majority of the people are concerned. In this spiritually and scientifically integrated philosophy of life, man will find not only surcease from this present day's made race to oblivion, but will find instead a new concept of the continuity of life. and with the Garden of Eden life will come happiness, creativeness and fearlessness. It was intimated in the foregoing pages that it was quite obvious that it would require several trips to gain a comprehensive understanding of the Martian way of life, and that therefore I would quite likely, from time to time, make similar visits or flights. Since concluding the last pages, Muriel has made contact several times and has given or shown me pertinent information regarding several issues which I would like to clear up. In case some of you are wondering, just as I did, what caused his people to go underground, and why they do not migrate to some other planet, since they have all the necessary craft to do so. Muriel explained all this by first saying that Mars was, up until about 100,000 years ago, a planet very similar to the Earth. There was air, water, and an abundance of plant and animal life. The cities flourished on the surface, just as ours do. At that time, through their occult science and also with their superior telescopes, they saw, somewhere out in space, a cataclysm take place. One of the giant suns suddenly went berserk, flared up like a nova and then exploded in a terrific blinding flash. Huge chunks hurtled out into space in different directions, each one a smaller, white-hot, atomically burning sun, shooting off great streamers of atomic energies. It was determined by calculations that one of these fiery pieces would pass very close to our solar system. As it was larger than our own sun, it was conceivable that there would be tremendous gravitational pull, besides giving off great energies. It was also determined, as light traveled much faster in space than this huge chunk, that it would pass our solar system. This therefore gave the Martians a grace period for preparation. They had, however, a choice, to stay on Mars or to migrate to another planet far away from this solar system. After a search of the nearby, practical limits of the heavens, it was found that there was no other planet available which would be suitable. So an alternative was decided upon. They could build huge cities underground. During the next 200 years or so, an almost frantic building program was assiduously pursued. We can well imagine some of the problems, the sacrifices, and the labor and research which went into this tremendous project, but it was finally accomplished. In due time all was snug and ship-shape as possible. Buried deep under many feet of rock and earth, in their newly constructed dome-like cities, the people of Mars waited for the final hours. Day by day they watched the white glowing mass of light grow larger and larger. There was no really accurate way by which to measure how close it would pass or just how hot it would be. No doubt many thought it would be the end. Finally the hour struck. Muriel stated that for 8 days the planet was rocked, torn and twisted, as great forces blasted and ripped the surface. Plant and animal life disappeared almost entirely, except for the few species which escaped by being buried in caves. The air and water, too, were largely dissipated or drawn off with the passing nova. When it was over, Mars was decimated and burned to a cinder. Other planets also suffered. On Earth there were great earthquakes and tidal waves. A great continent and civilization, called Lemuria, sank beneath the sea. Great deserts were burned into the surface in places which were formerly beautiful forests and plains. The Sahara and Gobi deserts were two of these. Earth's orbit and axis, or the poles, were also changed. Instead of a circular orbit, Earth was rocked into an elliptical orbit, with the addition of a very slight but definite wobble or oscillation, which it has never lost. Uranus was pushed out into an orbit much further away from the Sun. Neptune suffered a similar fate, although not quite so pronounced. It is conceivable that the other planets were also affected according to their size and position at the time of the passing of this huge celestial atom bomb. No doubt the knowledge of this cataclysm will clear up some of the mysteries of Earth's history which have been puzzling the seekers of truth for many years. Another question might be asked in regard to the Martians' system of time. As nearly as can be determined, they maintain a daylight and dark cycle of days, just as we do. This is done by simply dimming the overhead dome lights at regular intervals. A week is about 12 days. There are apparently no months tabulated.